they're now bringing it to the front. It's a bit like going to the butcher, and most of what the butcher is doing now is right in front of your eyes, because you're getting this sense of these are the experts that are there. So if there is an experience, there will be the odd business that there won't be that experiential piece, but make it real. And I think service is absolutely going to be a key part of the formula. And of course, everybody says we have good service. Now, first of all, good isn't good enough, because you won't win any awards for good. So your service needs to be in that position of great, and great is actually hard to achieve. It's that tiny few extra words, or that tiny bit of advice extra, and I think that's a challenge for everybody here, is to say, are you sure with service that you're operating in this space that says great rather than good?
Cool. And I think retail for me has always been, it's not necessarily what you do, it's how you make people feel. And that's exactly what you're talking about there. I suppose there's no questions in the chat at the moment, James, and I will open it up to the room in a few moments. I suppose some of the things you mentioned, the IKEA piece there, and we've heard the phrase a lot during COVID. We're in this together, and stay strong, and we're together, we're stronger, and so forth, and phrases like that. And you and I have both come from corporates where we've got big companies, we've got lots of people to turn to for support. But solopreneurs and working in small businesses, we don't necessarily have that support. So working together, should small businesses be working together? And if so, what are the sort of things we should be doing to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I always talk about, and she talks about it openly, there's a hairdresser in Cork City, Icon, IKON is the salon. Val there is a bit of a dynamo who runs it, but recognized very quickly that she was terribly isolated as a single site salon owner, and has teamed up with two others around the country. And in bygone days, they used to meet up once a month. They'd go to one of the three venues, and there was only one item on the agenda, which is, what are we each doing that's working that maybe someone else isn't doing. They now do that on Zoom, but she made the point that you could become very closeted on your own. And I think whether it's people on your street, whether it's sessions like this, there's probably not enough of street or town initiatives happen, where people are not alone talking together, but also promoting their street or their village or their town, as a giving people many reasons. I'm always saying to people, look, if you had 10 businesses, 10 retailers, 10 social media followings, just think of any single message that all 10 agree to put out there. Or maybe they're putting out messages about each other. So I'm telling my customers about you and vice versa. There's terrible strength in that. And I suppose when you think about what we were saying earlier, when you're up against technology and online and the big guys and the international guys, there's stuff you can do that they can't. And I suppose that's one of them, is by, and I always find the down and dirty ideas is where the magic is at, and where the solutions are. Somebody says something at an event, and it's the eureka moment for you. Or you've been trying to solve something. We're doing a lot of work with Unpost at the moment, and they have, I won't give it its proper name now, but they have a package basically if you're over 50 that you can save for your funeral, and there is demand for these things. But there's a terrible awkwardness about trying to raise this, as you can imagine, with customers. And even I was scratching my head saying, and then one of the group one day said, oh, she said, I've solved it. And they're all looking at her. And she said, yes, she said, my friend is an undertaker. And she tells me they're inundated with inquiries. And the customers are asking the undertaker, if I give you 50 quid a week, would you put it aside? The undertaker doesn't want anything to do with it. So in fact, she was off up to her undertaker with her leaflets. So I know that's a bit of a quirky one, but nonetheless, the answers come sometimes from that, kind of deep knowledge each of you has of retailing, or sometimes by you commenting on someone else's business as a retailer and saying, but would you not do this? And I think that's the real work that you can do together.
Yeah, and repeat business. Yeah, your old boss, Fergal Quinn, used to ask that question, what business didn't need repeat business? And the answer he often got was Undertaker. which he always then used to have a lovely response about why that wasn't the correct response and why we should be focusing on. I'd like to open up. Is there any questions from our guests here today that you would like to ask? Just jump in, unmute yourself and jump on with the question.
I'd like to ask James a question.
Thanks, Peter. Go ahead.
There's a sign outside Trinity College, as you probably call, James, that says disruptors welcome for the new business school. Where do you see disruption in the food business over the next few years? I know we talk about innovation, but disruption is something that's maybe on the technology side, but it must be happening in the food industry as well. I know we have it in the health foods and things like that, but where do you see the key ones over the next few years?
I think a lot of it is going to be, if it's specifically food, I think it's going to be about how people eat and you know how that can be brought to people maybe in a slightly different way. So you know we picture eating as maybe a kind of and COVID has accelerated some of this, but a more formal arrangement, and you cook from scratch and you put it on the table. But I think the disruption is going to come in the form of, you know, we're seeing at the moment people working from the suburbs or working from the regional towns, and suddenly those in that feeding them in the cafes and others are changing how they're getting that food to people. I notice things like Just Eat have their local Spar shop and these things. Now, who would have thought that you'd have your hot deli delivered to your house, or would even be interested in it? I'm not sure how many people use it. So I think the disruption is going to come in the format. We've seen the kits, you know, taking on more thing that, God, I'd love something special, but I don't want to get a fully cooked meal in. But if someone does the thinking for me and the slicing and the dicing, I'd love to put the pieces together and cook them myself. So it could be format. I think it would be probably the one that I would say is where most disruption. The box schemes, you know, those kit box schemes, Ireland is behind, but in other parts of the world we're seeing massive growth in that. I met a lady in Dublin a number of years ago, and she probably had gone too far on bespoking the service, but she had teamed up with a gym, and every single person had a bespoke menu. So if I was on a weight loss or a cholesterol lowering or whatever it was, all of my ingredients. Now, instead of doing 4 categories, she did everyone bespoke and couldn't keep up with the business. But she was charging like €320 per week, and she was giving them every meal from dawn to dusk. Her clients were saying, this is too cheap. You rarely hear that. So there's a good example of a disruptor as part of that. I think it's going to be in the format that, particularly with food, that we take food.
Yeah, and coming together on that theme, there's no reason why we can't all brainstorm and become the disruptors in the marketplace and do something very different. Anybody else? Final question for James before we wrap the session up. Nicola.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing, I come from a very small town called Kilcullen. It's a population of about 3,000, maybe 4,000, but it has a fairly significant hinterland. And just interested in what James would have in terms of promoting the town.
Yes. And I did a session last week with a different part of the country with a town, and exactly that was the agenda for the few hours that we were talking. And I suppose first and foremost, decide what it is the strategy. What's the message? What is it you want to be known for? So are you the shopping town, or are you the kind of more leisure town, quirky mix of art and craft and cafe, and it's a nice leisurely place to go to? Or is it about local services that you at least have one of each? We have a hairdresser, we have a beautician, we have a whatever. What we looked at in that other town as well was there were empty units. But in order to find out what empty retail spaces were, you had to go to 4 or 5 different auctioneers. And we were saying to them, look, would you not create a prospectus for the town, not by property, but for the town, where you upsell the benefits of any retailer coming in, and where you take, and here's all the empty units, and you put them into one place. Now, they can still go to the individual property companies, but you've created one document or something online, and then I suppose you promote that to retailers who might not be there, particularly where there's a gap in a category. And then I suppose, you know, when you're clear on what that vision is, and when you're clear on what is you want to be known for, I suppose you're then into everything from the online newsletter, building databases. The lovely thing about the Kilcullen, I think you said it was, and rural communities like that, or semi-rural communities like that, is that there's a community feel, there's a parish feel, and sometimes your communication can be a positive. It's easier to get messages to people. You know, there are already channels and all of that, you know, the existing channels that are there. There might be I always talk about Mums of Glanmire, and Mums of Glanmire is a Facebook group. There are 7,000 mums, but business people tell me you can't post from the outside. It's a private group. But when they approach the administrator, and if they're allowed to promote in it, the response is instant. Because it's that closed group, they don't get to see a lot, but when they do curate something and put it in there, so a lot could be done using social. But I think I'd take it back to the first message all the time, which is, you know, if a town is not clear on what it stands for, it'll be like pinball, because there'll be different messages firing off constantly. I think if it sits under an umbrella message, is good.
Okay, great, thanks.
James. So creating a vision where you want to get to. James, we've come to the end, unfortunately, and I know you are tight for time this morning. So thank you very much for sharing all of that knowledge this morning. It's wonderful. I know you could talk for another 2 hours if we let you. But thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much.